So tell me about how one trains to go into television when there are no role models and you've never been in television before.
Well, you get copy, get a mirror with good light, a tape recorder, and you sit in front of it and you read to yourself. I still think that's a good method even today.
What are you reading to yourself?
Well, anything I could. Sometimes I'd write stuff, sometimes I'd read the newspaper, whatever, but I'd watch myself to see how I was projecting and how I looked. And all of that, and put a tape on so I could see how it sound. And that
An audio tape, you mean, at this point.
And that was how I prepared.
And then what did you
Real
do?
wonderful, real high tech.
This is the Belva Davis School of Broadcasting.
Yes.
So then what did you do?
Well, I started, and it was a long process, well over a year of applying and applying and applying.
Now, where are you applying? Are you?
Every station. Actually, when I first started out, I thought, what I need to do first is apply to the newspapers. I have skills there. Get rejected, which I knew I would. Then try for TV.
Mainstream newspapers, you
Mainstream. And so I don't know why I figured that out. I don't know why I did that, but I did. And then I just started applying to every station in town more than once. Every few months I'd send a new application or a reminder note. Something of that sort. And at the same time, I was working, I had developed and was producing a program called the Miss Bronze California Beauty Pageant. And I somehow convinced a guy named Ian Zellick, who used to work at KTVU, that's Channel 2 here locally, that he should allow me to put these young women on the air, on television. And Ian had said to me, well, you know, I can give you the time, but I don't have any staff to produce this show, so if you can get a producer and a director, we'll give you the spot and you can do it. And I remembered when he first told me that, you know, of course I agreed to it enthusiastically, and I left Channel 2, which was down at Jack London Square, and drove directly to the Oakland Main Library where my friend Rosemary worked, and asked her to go with me to the media file, the reference, to look up what a TV producer and a director did.
Research.
So once we found out what they did, then we proceeded to try to produce this show, which I hosted. And
that was your first television appearance?
My first television appearance. And I did that for a number of years, maybe 2 or 3 years. And I think the second year, one TV critic wrote a marvelous article about me, saying that there should be some place for me in television, and lots of other nice things. And so, of course, I had that 15 copies of that sent to everybody who I could send it to. And you know, and
but
just,
the calls didn't just flow in, did they?
Oh no, it really took pressure from people who I'd consider in the forefront of the civil rights movement to even get me interviews. I couldn't get interviews, and the interviews were really pretty sad.
What kind of pressure do you think?
Well, it was during the civil rights movement, probably threats of picketing and whatever have you. But I'm not sure if it got that far. But it took key people who I think managers knew were associated with the civil rights movement in town to call to say, so-and-so has been trying to get you on the phone, trying to get an interview about a job, and we really would appreciate it if you talk with her.
So what happened, some of the interviews you did go to? Did you get hired right away?
A couple of stories. One was that I was at an interview. I met a woman who knew Gypsy Rose Lee, who had one of the early talk shows, even though she'd been a strip tease artist, fan dancer, and all of that. She had this wonderful talk show that they recorded at Channel 7 here in San Francisco, the ABC station. So my friend made clothes for her from time to time. And also, they'd have little fashion shows, and my friend's clothes would appear. So I was over with her one day, and found out that they were going to hire a new reporter to work on air at Channel 7. And that's when I started putting the pressure on to get an interview for that job. And the day that I was there, Ingrid Bergman's daughter, Pia Lindstrom, was a guest on the show and had come through, and she was doing some sort of promotional thing for American Express to prove that you could drive America and you didn't need cash. You could use your American Express card and all of that for everything. And so she was on to talk about this with a friend of hers. And she asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, I'm here trying to get an interview because they're going to start this early morning show, and and I want to try to be considered for that. Well, that was not the day of my interview. I finally got it. I got it with the station manager, a very insulting interview in which, I was told that they just were not hiring negresses on television, but if they ever considered a negress, I would certainly be on his list. Anyway, Pia Lindstrom was hired for that job because she applied for it.
It was nice of you to share that information.
Informing her what was going on. So I didn't get that job. But I did, I followed the news closely, and I read an article one day about another woman who was in television here, a woman named Nancy Reynolds Clark. Is it Reynolds Clark or Clark Reynolds? I can't remember. Clark Reynolds. And she was working on television here at Channel 5. And she had said in that interview, it talked about her relationship with Ronald Reagan, who was then running for governor of California. And it said that if Ronald Reagan was elected, she'd certainly like to work for him, with him. And so the day after he was elected, I wrote a letter applying for her job. And to her amazement, she was called in to ask if she was leaving. Well, she's a wonderful gal, and I wrote a note of apology later for that. But she did finally, because nothing, of course, had been worked out. The man had just been elected. Yeah. But eventually she did announce that she'd be leaving. And I did get an interview. But it was not a slam dunk. They also interviewed 67 other people.
I see.
But I ended up being selected for that job. And that was...
So your total experience to this point was the hosting of the Miss Bronze pageant. That was your total television experience.
Yeah.
You had print news experience and radio.
So, right. So when I came in for them to decide whether if this would work for me, they sent me out with a photographer and asked if I'd go out and do a stand-up, and I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. So I was lucky. I ended up with a wonderful guy named Stephen Posti, a Hungarian expatriate, was here, and he'd been an accountant, and he didn't know anything about photography when he arrived here from Canada after fleeing Hungary. And he bluffed his way into a job as a photographer, so he said he'd take care of me. He'd help me get a job as a reporter, too. So, he told me in his heavy Hungarian accent, "Don't worry about a thing, baby. I take care of you. You just stand there." And so I did my stand-up with Stephen Posti, which obviously came out okay.
Managed it.
Yeah, managed it.
What did you feel was your role at this point as a television reporter? Why were you there? And why was it important for you to be there?
I have to admit there was some confusion. There was some confusion. I mean, I know I wanted to be there because of this whole thing of feeling that if people understood each other more, we'd have fewer problems. I mean, that was an underlying. That wasn't at the top of the heap, but that was an underlying motive. I'd have to say that it must have played a pretty big part because one of the things, I mean, after I was hired at KPIX, I had no idea what my salary was till I got my first paycheck. I never even asked them what I was being paid.
Is that right? You probably would have paid them, do you think?
I think I probably would have. I never even asked them when I was being paid. And I just thought it was an exciting medium, but I also really thought that people that looked like me had not had the right, I mean, remember, we're now in the midst of the civil rights movement, the beginning of the anti-war movement and all of this ferment that's going on. We've already had the Watts riots and all of that. So, I mean, everyone had concluded that we had to understand each other better if we were going to survive. And I think I thought I could play some part in that. Because I really do like all kinds of people. I did not come at it with a bias against anybody. And even though, and it's weird because, you know, as a small child, I certainly did not have a lot of exposure to people of other races. And even as an adolescent, you know, outside of the school setting, I had no exposure. But I never had any fear of other people, and I always had a curiosity about them. And I think that was part of it. Yeah. I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
What did you not know about the news business?
Everything.
Such as, what would you learn
Everything,
subsequently?
Everything. I mean, I
After
knew
your
the basic
Hungarian
facts.
tutor, then,
I
yeah.
knew the basic facts, you know, and that was that, you know, that you got the 5 W's out of the elements out of the way. I mean, I knew enough to know I had to deliver on that. But I think my goal always had been to somehow to get to the personal. If there's anything I always tried for, was to try to get to something that was outside of the hard facts of the story. To get to some sort of feeling, and that was long before the consultants decided this is how you put together a news story. It was just my desire to do that.
You remember a specific example of a story that you feel achieved that very well?
Well, I mean, there were lots of stories that I can remember, but I guess the series of stories that stand out is the series that started with the odyssey of dealing with women who'd had breast cancer, because those were very personal stories. And moving past that to deal with those in the medical profession who had to minister to them, and trying to get them to go past the barrier that they put up in order to do the kind of work that they have to do, to talk about their patients in some way other than through their medical charts. That was a real challenge. And so I did a series of stories like that that touched me a great deal. And because of some of the comments that have come back to me years later, I know they played some part in the lives of the people that I talked to.
As a participant and a journalist during the Civil Rights Movement, a participant in covering the Civil Rights Movement, what's your biggest memory of that period in the Bay Area's history?
Well, I think the fact that we never really had a bad riot here was always amazing to me.
Meaning San Francisco? You mean
and Oakland.
Here in Oakland?
Yeah. I mean, you're in Oakland, the home of the Black Panther Party, the fierce Black Panther Party, and there's never really any trouble. Never has been in Oakland, knock wood. But I guess it would be the early meetings of the emerging Black Power structure. I attended in the very early 60s the first meeting where Stokely Carmichael, Huey Newton, H. Rap Brown, Eldridge Cleaver was in prison, Ron Karanga, I mean, the fables of that time in terms of the Black Power movement all got together at a place called the Russian Center to talk about the Black agenda and which way we should go, and the division within the community as to whether to follow the nonviolent path of Martin Luther King or to go with those who wanted to see the cause pursued in other ways. Attending that conference and a similar conference in Los Angeles where the same questions were debated, those were important meetings, and I was there and reported on and took part in those. The other would be reporting on the Panthers through those years and their ups and downs and trials and tribulations.
Was it hard for you
Extremely.
to cover that
Yeah.
issue?
Yeah,
Why?
it was. Because the things that they talked about were real problems. The conditions they described were real conditions. The Oakland Police Department was repressive. I had grown up with that and had young boy that I knew who we grew up with, who we thought had been unjustly beaten and punished by the police in ways that should never have happened. So I knew a lot about what they were saying, that it was true. I also knew that black children were going to school hungry every day, and I knew enough about nutrition to know that this affected their abilities. I know that the Panthers were the first community-based program to feed children in the mornings. And here I was reporting on that, but one of my best friends was running the breakfast program at the Episcopal Church, which I gave money to. And because the need was so great with the children that came to that program. So it was a time of conflict. I had no belief in their talk of violence, which they did very little of. There is the illusion that they were this radical, violent group, but they seldom, until after the COINTEL operation started, when, through the government manipulation, when they started to fight with each other. No one can tell you of an incident where the Panthers came and started to shoot out with anybody. The police came and would shoot at them, and they'd shoot back. And so you had those kinds of things. And so, it was an understanding of it from both sides of the aisle.
Was there ever a time during those movements or other movements that you covered as a reporter where you felt physically threatened?
Oh, yeah.
You're not a big person, Belva. How tall are you, Belva?
I'm 5'1". But I got to tell you, I never felt unsafe where people told me it was dangerous. I remember going into our one, little disturbance we had here at Hunters Point, the so-called riot of Hunters Point. I never felt afraid that. That what they did with us, which was really unconscionable. A few of us were being hired on to go in and work for white media where none of us were working because they didn't want to send white reporters in. I don't remember ever feeling unsafe in that environment. The times where I felt unsafe, almost always, were times when I was at a demonstration where the Alameda County Sheriff's Department was on the verge of moving people out. Because I know of fellow reporters who'd been badly beaten, and I was always afraid of that by the Sheriff's Department.
Did anything ever happen to confirm your fears?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Yeah, I
To
watched
you personally,
Earl. I was bounced around, pushed around, shoved around, but no one ever struck me. But I had watched Earl Caldwell beaten, and I will never forget that. And he was, fine reporter. Just those things happen.
Your confrontation with the... Go ahead. We'll stop a minute.
Yes, please. Anyway, I think that all my moments of fear in those early days had to be a fear of getting accidentally or on purpose beaten badly by the Sheriff's Department or the Police Department. That's what I was afraid of. And occasionally, I have to admit, I was afraid of getting hit by a brick thrown by the students because they also threw bricks at the press. Nobody liked us in those days. The students thought that we were capitalist tools, and the cops thought that we were left-wing radicals, and so we were not welcomed on either side of the aisle. But in particular, the Alameda County Sheriff's Department had some people in it at that time that had difficulty. This short black woman who was a reporter. And so one day at Berkeley, you're standing at Sather Gate, which they often did. They just covered that whole, that spanse between the gate. You know, students were marching around and so on. So I walked up, as should be, and our little press cards say it, we're allowed through police lines. And I started to go through the police line to the other side of the gate. And somebody decided, well, it was time to give old Belva her comeuppance. And so this row of maybe 20, 25 cops lined up there in their helmets and blue uniforms. We used to call them the blue meanies. Decided to take me by the shoulders and spin me like a little top down the entire row. Several thousand students on the other side watching this. Extremely humiliating. Of course, there's nothing I can do to stop it once they get you going, you know. And the worst part about it is by the time they finish, I'm so dizzy I can't stand up straight. Well, anyway, that was a little much, and so there were pictures taken of that. And so Sheriff Madigan did write me a letter of apology. Well, actually, the station filed a formal complaint, and he wrote me a letter of apology for that.
Why do you feel you, of all the people there, was singled out for that?
Well, I think it's kind of obvious, number one. I was female and I was black, and they just thought there's, you know, whatever, that I certainly wasn't, they felt I wasn't on their side, that's for sure. And, but the very same day, you know, I was with a guy named Tony Fazita, and we went over and we got caught in Never Never Land, and the kids pelted us with bricks. So,
you had a good day.
I had a great day that day.
Now that you brought it up, the issue of women in the media, how do you think things have changed from when you started to where they are now?
You know, I think there are people out there that think that women always covered hard news. And it's so funny, you look at a young woman and you say to her, you know, the women used to write for the women's page. The men wrote the news. You did the features. That the early women on television did the noon talk shows, covered the flower shows, did the fashion shows. They didn't do hard news. They cannot imagine it because it seems so illogical, but that's the way it was. So today's world is so different in that women are where they should be, covering anything that they choose to cover, or they have the ability to cover, that is. And working their way into high-level positions on the management side. I haven't noticed a gender imprint.
Meaning?
On any news. I mean, I haven't noticed anything any different in terms of the management side of it, where women are present, any different from what you get when men are running it so far. Maybe it's because men still are the ultimate power group in the business.
Would you expect a gender imprint, or would you like to see one, or do you think there should be one?
I would think so. I would hope there would be. I mean, it's obvious to me that there has been a big gap in our history and in world events that have been left unnoticed, uncovered, because no one was thoughtful enough about those issues to present them. I don't want to harpen back a lot to the whole issue of women and breast cancer, but I don't think a man would have thought of putting that issue forward 15, 20 years ago. But it was something that we women who were getting into the business were interested in. Child care became a big issue because it was something we were confronting. I mean, there are issues that just because they have no import in the life of men to the degree that it does women, that just would not be thought about, were it not for the fact that there were women talking about it. You know, but it's like this year, this business of covering the year of the women in politics. Um, I didn't notice that I had an easier time with my. In fact, I had a worse time with. We have two news shows, with my woman producer than I did with the man who produced. There's a man that produces one of the shows and a woman who produces the other, and I almost always ended up on the show where the man was producing. And I'm not sure it's because of women who are pioneering don't want, aren't overcompensating.
Mm-hmm.
And
You mean the producer was choosing
mm-hmm.
you? The male producer was
Mm-hmm.
choosing to use
my
you.
story.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a female story.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I think we expected certain kinds of things to happen as women moved into power.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be interesting to see if politics, if any of those things really happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
What about your role in trying to change things for minorities in television?
Well, I've attempted that from many different ways. Badgering managers, very good at that. Becoming active in the union, which was as racist in its attitude about certainly African Americans, as were employers. Working with the union to erase some of those barriers. I still am working in that area. Speaking out as often as possible. Taking on interns, working with them as much as possible. Writing about it from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm still at it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how have things changed from when you started the good fight there?
Well, for a while it looked like nothing was changing because when I started at Channel 5, there were two of us, one male, one female. And for many years, that was the same picture at that station, just people got replaced in those slots. For a number of years, where I work now at KRON Television, I was the only black in my newsroom, harkening back even to thinner times than when I first started. And things are not excellent today.
Mm-hmm.
At my station, there are more blacks than I've ever worked with at one time.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because we started from such poverty in that area.
Mm-hmm. What needs to happen, in your view, to change that?
Well, I think that people object to being told what to do or being mandated what to do. But there's some things that are so ingrained in us about how we make decisions that without some guidelines and nudging, they just don't get done. You may have the best of intentions, but they just don't get done. And so as we have relaxed the rules and the regulations governing broadcast, the plight of minorities have fallen on hard times once again. So I'm a real advocate of re-regulation in terms of viewpoints being heard, if not employment. There are very few programs where minorities can come on and talk about the problems peculiar to them because we're so addicted to and program for every hour on the spectrum to make money today. Even at 2 o'clock in the morning, it's hard to get on the air.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's very little outlet for community people, and not just black people, but community people of all sorts. There are very few places they can be heard and seen outside of a sanitized and scrutinized and packaged news story. Very few places where they can come and speak for themselves. Much fewer places than when I started in the business.
So if you could change that, how would you do it?
Well, I doubt if it could happen because once in a democratic society like ours, in an economy-driven world where once you find out you can make money from something, it's very difficult to go back and say, I'm not going to make money at this anymore. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I would try to return the airways to the people. They don't own them anymore. I don't know how you do that except by government action. I think the equal time doctrine wasn't a bad idea. Mm-hmm. I think serving the community in which you live was a good idea. I don't think that Oprah Winfrey and Phil Donahue is public affairs that serves this community, which is the way it's counted today. I think a commitment to healthy children's programming, since our children are going to watch television anyway, is a good idea. They're all things that don't exist anymore. I'd change it.
Why is it important in your view that multiplicity of voices be heard?
Because we live in a society that is diverse. Most of our major centers are diverse communities in which people have to learn to get along with one another. And since we've become, as a country, addicted to television, I think that medium owes a responsibility to the country to do something more than what it does, and that's make money for those who own the stock. I just don't see how, with so many of us getting what we know about life, forming our opinions by what we see, that we're ever going to get healthy till we get a hold of this thing called television and create it in the image that we want to see our country develop, or at least shape it so there are some alternatives that allows us to make decisions that help us to operate as a country pulling together in some way. You know, I still firmly believe that much of the violence that we see, even though people will argue and say there's no evidence, I just think you'd have to be an idiot not to know that our violent society is based a great deal on what our children have grown up with, and that is violence, violence, violence on television. You know, I don't think you can divorce it.
So how would you change it?
Well, I still believe in the First Amendment, mm-hmm. But I think there ought to be some choices, and I just don't think there are many. I mean, I know in our market, we just disbanded our children's and youth department, and ours was the last and the 5th largest market in America. I think that's awful. I think there ought to be programs where children can be seen, where young people, where adolescents can come on and talk about what's important to them. They ought to be able to express it through the medium that they value, which is television. Yeah.
As you look the future of television, over the air and otherwise, what do you see in, say, the year 2000?
I'm hoping for a revolution. I'm hoping that people will seize the airways. That's what I'm hoping for. Otherwise, where it's going, I won't be watching it.
Thanks. Okay.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Sorry.
You can watch it, you know, that's it. Remember the times when, or the years when you used to
Oh,
just
God, you had to rush home.
change your whole life.
Whole life around.
Oh, yeah.
To get,
Oh, yeah.
You know,
See it now and the real early days, you know, I remember that as a child watching. My parents had a routine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you didn't miss that.
I know.
Yeah, and then, you know, really, when you think about it, See It Now was on 2 o'clock, something like that, our time, Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
You know, and people gave up their Sunday afternoon to watch television, you know.
I know.
It's hard to imagine now.
Yeah.
It really is.
And the Ed Morrow program.
Oh, yeah.
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 All those early
Well, a
shows.
sense of mission, you know. There's a real sense of mission,
Right.
I think.
Sure.
Do this.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
Well, I do it even when I'm on the air.
Do you?
Yeah, and which is, it drives the director crazy.
Is that right? Has it just been since you hurt your eye?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
because it drips. And
Mhm.
I'm always trying to, do this, to wet it before, because in the middle of a serious interview, you don't want anybody to think you're sitting there crying. And so I figure if I get the moisture out of the one eye that's dripping, you know,
Yeah.
they'll notice the other one is dry.
Yeah, right. You'll figure it out.
Otherwise, if I'm sitting there and you see this tear going down, you know, that can be a little
Yeah,
embarrassing.
especially if it's not a, you know, a story that would even
I
you know,
know.
need it or
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. Well, the person you're interviewing will think that you're very empathetic. You see that you've just felt all their pain and everything else has really gotten involved, you know, in the story.
Yeah.
I think that's 73.
No, not that long. So we've been here I think we moved here in 76.
So that's
Like 16 years.
16
16 years. Mhm.
Yeah, that'd be tough. We've been in our house about 10 years, and that's the longest we've ever been in one house.
Mhm. Oh, same here.
For you too.
This is the longest I've ever lived any one place in my entire life.
Yeah, I think when I think about it, that's probably true for me.
Mhm. For what I know versus what I was told versus what I read.
Mm-hmm.
That's what confuses me a lot.
If the picture in your head came from somebody's story or it came from
Yes.
your actual experience,
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah,
true.
especially about the very early years, because I've told you before that I spent so much time trying to wipe out my early memories that to try to recall them has been very difficult as to what I felt, knew, or heard.
Well, he said that he, you know, would make money in bundles because he was on an island.
Oh.
And made the island into a place like he wanted, and that took him about 7 years. Same thing. I think it was a little longer because it was an island, and then he sold it.
Yeah.
You know, and just moved on. He said.
You know what happened though here? We moved too. We moved out and we rented this place out
Okay.
for about a year and a half. Probably at about the 7-year point. We moved into Golden Gateway and lived in a townhouse for a couple of years. And then we moved back. At least we were smart enough not to sell.
Yeah, yeah. That's something we haven't thought about, but I think it could be a
It was good.
idea. Yeah.
Because we know now we don't want to live, well,
In a
Bill
townhouse.
doesn't. I want to live in a
You do,
townhouse.
yeah.
He doesn't want to live in a townhouse. But, you know, we both have to live together.
Right. Well, maybe.
And then try to buy something else in Sacramento. Because we'd have the income from these, we found that doesn't work anymore. The prices are such that you can't get rent enough to cover.
Yeah, that's a great plan. You know.
It sounded wonderful in our dreams. I mean, on
Yeah.
paper it sounded just grand because
Yeah.
you'd be living for practically nothing in town.
I think it used to be possible. I don't think it is. That's
Couldn't
right.
get that
The
formula.
economics of it.
Just
Maybe
one
now
thing.
at this moment, if you had the cash, you know,
Yeah.
that you'd be able to go in and do that. But
Problem is you got to
have the cash.
have the cash.
Yeah, I think there are people out there at this moment taking advantage of it, but they're not normal people.
I
They're people
know.
with huge
Yeah.
bankrolls somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
And there are a lot of those, though, people who really made lots of money in the 80s who are cleaning up again. The lucky ones, not the ones that ended up with
Jail.
real bad junk bonds
Yeah.
or in jail, but
Yeah.
some few.
But it's almost like it, no matter what happens, it's in their favor. A business magazine, you can get a health magazine, you can get a child care magazine, you can get all of these different targeted products, and they can deliver essentially different products to different households. So they would throw a package on your doorstep that might be different from the place next door based on what your interests are, and I think that's really intriguing. Because
It
they
must be
said,
a nightmare for delivery.
but they said it's not. They have the technology right now. They're doing inserts, you know, Mervyn's
Yeah,
as opposed
that's
to
true.
Montgomery Ward's as opposed to
Yeah.
something else. Why can't they insert their own magazines with their own advertising, targeted? It would kill a magazine business, you know, the regional magazines like Sacramento or San Francisco,
Right.
and they are in good shape now anyway.
Right.
But it's really an intriguing idea because nobody can really do that as well as the newspaper.
Yeah.
They have a delivery system in place,
Mhm.
and all they have to do is wrap plastic around it,
Yeah.
you know, and then
That's
it'll be a way
interesting.
for them to get more money.
That's interesting.
You know, I think it's a real intriguing idea. The Orange County Register has beats, for instance, that are really different. They have a mall beat.
A mall?
A mall beat, yeah. that does nothing but cover the malls.
malls.
Yeah, and they decided that that's where society is.
Sure. Of a harder town here in San Francisco,
Mhm.
and I had a little experience, I guess last Christmas for the first time. I decided not to shop downtown and to go and shop at the close-in malls here,
Mhm.
and it was like another world. It was like I'd gone to suburbia when I went to Stonestown, because they've done the Stonestown Mall over
Mhm.
again.
Mhm.
And I liked it, the convenience of it, you know, because they were open late, and they were open at night, and
Mhm.
all of this stuff, and
Mhm.
so we did all of our Christmas shopping there.
You know, so I think there's a lot to that. So I think that's terrific. I don't know that we're going to recognize the media world in 10 years from
I
where it
don't
is
either.
now.
But the one, if it's the one that we're living with right now, I won't mind it a lot.
You mean if it changes?
And no, I don't like I don't
Uh-huh.
like today's world. I don't like.
Mhm.
I don't like what we put on the air.
Mhm.
I mean, I sit at my desk too many nights and turn off our newscasts.
Mm.
That's not good.
Mhm.
I don't know. It probably says a lot about my age.
Well, it's not targeted to you, is it?
I know.
Truly.
So, you know, what can I say? We're doing well with the numbers. We're number 2.
Mhm.
We're not number 1, but we're number 2. So
Mhm.
what can I say about that?
Mhm. But of a declining audience, of a shrinking audience. Yeah.
It's because the other night they started the newscast out about something about ecstasy. I'm not sure. That's an old story, but we have
Mhm.
new people. So that was our lead. We went from that to
There's the fire we talking about.
Uh-huh,
You know, are there people there? Have animals escaped?
Yes.
When do you expect the fire to be
Yeah,
under control?
yeah,
But it's just
yeah.
more like
Mhm.
it's
The
a
smoke
fire.
was billowing in the sky when we arrived. That was it. I know exactly what he's talking about.
Mhm.
You know.
What is that? The consultants telling them to do that, or they just don't? They aren't trained as journalists.
What is so funny to me is the power of the consultants.
Mhm.
It's just so. I remember one night I was criticizing at the beginning of Sweeps some story that just came out of nowhere. Oh, I know what it was. It was a Sweeps series called Deadbeat Dads. And there I was criticizing us. 2 nights later, here was Tom Brokaw doing Deadbeat Dads.
Same thing.
So the same consultant.
Mhm.
We all must be listening to the same,
Mhm.
doing the same topics.
Mhm. In a way, I wonder if it isn't like what happened to radio when it just went format. I mean, pretty soon you could just do a format
Mhm.
and just put it up on the air anywhere.
Yeah.
You know. And
Well, it
some
may
of
be
those-
what we're doing. I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm not paying close enough attention
Mhm.
to know what we're doing. But and I guess I'm being real critical now because we are in Sweeps, and that is
Mhm.
it's amazing to me that we put on our worst stuff during the most important period.
Worse from your point of view.
Worse from my point of view.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, it's sex and violence and anything else weird or odd we could find.
Well, on ABC7 with that.
It's one of the
That is
consultant-
on people's minds.
Yeah, that is one of the
Yeah.
consultant things that is useful because we
Mhm.
do that. We do where the jobs are
Mhm.
twice a week.
But you
No,
see-
we do it's called Who's Hiring.
So you really wouldn't need a consultant to tell you that. I
But
mean, if you were a
obviously-
news person.
Obviously, some we did because the format is the same across the country.
Is it right?
Mhm.
Mm. Well, they haven't done that.
It's like
so-
Waiting Child, you know, when we were all
Mhm.
doing that too.
Oh, Vic just really had distaste for that
Mhm.
series. Yes.
Yeah.
He was-
Channel 5 is still doing it.
Is that right? Is it
Yeah.
still, what's his name?
Oh,
Who was
okay.
doing it?
It's a guy. I can't
Yeah, a
remember.
guy from
Mhm.
Sacramento?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. They're still doing
Yeah.
Cable.
Mm-hmm.
it. Yeah. They leave no imprint.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
really sad.
Mm-hmm. Interchangeability of folk.
Well, I don't think it's that. I mean, it's not the fault of the person. It's
Mm-mm.
what they're told to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's,
Well, and their role isn't really, doesn't have an identity
Yeah.
attached to it.
and we have, you know, when you have a cap of 1:30 for your stories too, which is what our cap is, without, you know, special dispensation from someone up the line, it doesn't give you a long time to tell people a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And at night, it's 1:15.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
So now can I turn it?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe
And that's
you can
all of
identify
us.
the people.
That's my friend Rosemary, my best friend in life, and of course me and Bill. and Ralph Jones, who volunteered to be our best man right on the spur of the moment. And of course, Bill has a camera set up on tripod, and we all count it down certain seconds to get our smiles right.
Go ahead.
Well, this is my friend Rosemary, who I talk about all the time, my friend for life. And of course, that's me and Bill. Oh boy, how I wish we looked that good today. And our friend Ralph Jones, who became the instant best man on short notice.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I don't think we ever talked about this, though.
No, but it
So,
has a great picture.
Yeah.
What was the
Oh, dear.
project?
Actually, Howard Schatz is just a fabulously talented photographer who happens to also be a ophthalmologist and surgeon who really likes photography more than anything. And he just decided he's done a very he never shows, he won't let you see the proofs. And I had to practically beg to get him to give me the other print, the one that's my favorite. I think it's because it took him so long to convince me that I should take this dress that I value. Actually, it's the bottom to a dress of a friend of mine who's like they all have to be done at once. Are we okay?
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I mean, are they all presented at one time? Or?
No, as they're completed, they're sent. And Columbia just knows to be ready.
Picture a painting of my mother, and the painting was done from a small snapshot my brother used to carry with him when he was in the Navy, and he was in Japan, and he had this portrait done while he was overseas, and so it was around the house for a long time, and one day I discovered it and had it cleaned up and framed. But most people who come here think it's my daughter.
But you know, not so far from, you know, we've had the 70s hairstyles and the 60s
That's
hairstyles.
right. That's true. It's sort of like that.
And the men went through hairstyles like that.
That's my Aunt Ophelia, my mother's middle sister, and she was the first one that I was sent to live with for a time.
Actually, hold on one second.
Okay.
Okay, now this is who again?
My Aunt Ophelia, she's my mother's middle sister and the one that I went to live with as a small child. And she died in the very early part of my life. And but I believe I still remember her. It was the most stable time of my early childhood. Okay, this is my husband's aunt, and she was really quite important to the history of Oakland. She owned the first black restaurant in West Oakland, and she opened it to feed the black men who worked on the railroad, who worked as dining car waiters and other things down at the railroad. And she was quite the talk of the town and quite the grand lady, as you can. I bet you that dress was really something. It looks really grand.
See, I'm one of those guys who.
This is my husband's mother and her twin sister, the Logan twins. Nanny, as we call her, loved to have her picture taken, so we have lots and lots of pictures of her. She's the one with the little black tie around at the neck. That's Bill's mother.
Okay, let me get a single of you. Stan Atkinson down in Sacramento will never leave.
Yeah, well, I was wondering when he got into all that trouble, what was going to happen. Did it hurt his career?
Not so far.
Really? I was worried about that for him.
I think
How did that ever happen?
I'll tell you in a second.
Okay.
He's got the inside story. It's made so you won't lose them altogether.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this was the aunt that owned the restaurant. This was her husband, and they were both very grand, as you can see, and they loved formal attire. And My husband's family's roots are in the West Indies, and those are all very grand people.
Okay.
This one's probably a little older than this house, which is saying something, but I think it was taken around the turn of the century. We just found them in the basement just like this and just dusted them off and put them on the wall. Doesn't work for the inauguration. You have to make your own arrangements. That's my grandfather, my mother's father. He was the Baptist minister. Remember I talked about growing up in a family with Baptist ministers. Well, he's the Eugene, for which I get the Gene in my name that I never use anymore. And was really quite a guy. He lived outside of Monroe in a little town called Rayville, Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on him.
Anyway, I have nothing but fond memories, what few I have of him. So funny, they were separated and divorced for a very long time, and they died within days of each other. Her name is Virginia Woods Howard, and the famous story about the town where she came from, Mississippi, it's called Woodville. And there are two groups of woods, the white woods and the black woods, who live in Woodville. And they all sort of understand what happened. But she was really quite a woman.